Okay, let's unpack this. There are figures in history who, centuries later, still captivate us, not just for their public achievements, but for the profound mysteries of their private lives. Today, we're diving into one of the most intriguing and, frankly, contentious historical debates: the sexuality of Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how a question about a 19th century figure can actually tell us so much about our own present-day understanding of history, identity, and the evolving nature of social norms.
Right.
This deep dive isn't about definitively labeling Lincoln. I mean, how could we? Instead, our goal is to explore the arguments, sift through the evidence, and understand the real challenges involved in interpreting intimacy across entirely different eras.
Exactly. Our mission today is to sort of become expert guides to the source material articles, scholarly research, even snippets from old diaries to understand why this debate even emerged, what specific evidence proponents and critics point to, and most importantly, how we, as modern observers, can avoid the crucial trap of anachronism when looking at the past.
Yeah, that's key.
You'll hear us present a balanced view, laying out all the pieces of the puzzle so you can form your own informed perspective on this enduring historical question.
Okay.
So, let's start with what might seem like a truly surprising fact. If you were living in Abraham Lincoln's time, or even immediately after his death, you wouldn't find any documented public discussions about his sexuality. Think about that for a moment. For such a public and scrutinized figure, the silence is quite profound, and it's a critical starting point for understanding how this debate came about.
And that silence really is key. It's not just an absence of evidence, but evidence of an absence, or at least an absence of public discourse.
Right.
This is largely due to the profound differences in how sexuality, and especially same-sex attraction, was viewed and discussed in the 19th century. Such subjects simply weren't openly part of polite society's conversations.
Not at all.
The norms around personal privacy and what was considered appropriate to talk about were fundamentally different from our own.
But then, something clearly shifted. The debate about Lincoln's sexuality gained significant traction much, much later, specifically in the late 20th century, particularly since the mid-1990s.
Yeah, it really took off then.
And this isn't a coincidence at all. It aligned almost perfectly with a broader societal evolution. This was a time when attention to the private lives and sexual orientations of public figures really heightened, coinciding directly with the rise and increasing visibility of the gay rights movement. It was a cultural moment ripe for historical re-examination.
Precisely. And if we had to identify one pivotal moment that truly propelled this discussion into widespread public and scholarly scrutiny, it would undoubtedly be the posthumous publication of C.A. Tripp's 2005 book, The Intimate World of Abraham Lincoln.
That Tripp book. Yeah.
Tripp controversially put forward the idea that Lincoln was predominantly homosexual. That claim, whether you agree with it or not, completely changed the landscape of the conversation and forced historians to confront the question head-on.
That brings us directly to a fundamental challenge in this entire deep dive: the issue of anachronism. It's difficult enough to truly understand someone from 2 centuries ago, but it becomes exponentially more complex when we try to apply our modern labels and understandings of identity to them.
Absolutely.
It's like trying to put 21st century glasses on a 19th century figure.
Exactly. Interpreting historical sexuality presents inherent complexities and sensitivities because we're looking at it through a contemporary lens. Applying modern labels such as gay or homosexual to a historical figure from an era when such identities simply didn't exist within the same conceptual framework is, by its very nature, problematic.
It really is.
It's not just that the words weren't common. The concept of a fixed sexual identity in the way we understand it today wasn't yet formulated or widespread.
And it's not just about the words. In the 19th century, while engaging in certain same-sex acts might have been regarded as a vice, similar to other non-marital sexual acts, they didn't essentialize a person or typecast them as other in the way modern identity politics might.
Right, that's a crucial distinction.
Today, gay is often seen as a core inherent identity. Back then, it was more often viewed as a specific behavior or transgression if it was acknowledged at all.
That's why the very framing of the question, was Lincoln gay, is in itself a product of our contemporary identity constructs, not those of the 19th century. The lack of contemporary public discussion about Lincoln's sexuality isn't necessarily proof of its absence. It's more accurately a reflection of entirely different social categories and norms governing public discourse.
Okay.
This highlights a fundamental challenge in historical inquiry. The real risk of anachronism when we apply our modern social and psychological categories to past individuals and societies. We have to be incredibly careful not to misread the past through our present-day filters.
So what does this all mean for you as we explore this today? It means understanding the historical context of sexuality is paramount before drawing any conclusions based on present-day definitions.
You really have to.
We need to actively try to put ourselves in their shoes, in their time, and try to understand their world on its own terms, not just impose ours. It's a vital first step.
And this emphasis on context takes us directly to understanding the social and sexual landscape of 19th century America, which is absolutely crucial for interpreting Abraham Lincoln's relationships.
Right.
This era was characterized by something historians call male romantic friendships. These were deeply intimate, emotionally expressive bonds between men that were not only familiar but also widely socially acceptable. It's a concept that has largely faded or been redefined in our modern world.
And when we say deeply intimate, we really mean it. These weren't casual acquaintances. These relationships were founded on expressiveness, profound trust, and the sharing of insecurities, doubts, and hopes.
Yeah, really laying themselves bare emotionally.
They provided a vital sense of security and affection for men, particularly during significant life transitions, like when they were away from home for education, military service, or, as in Lincoln's case, starting a new life in a new town, far from family. They were a crucial emotional anchor.
What's truly fascinating here is how these relationships were expressed. Physical expressions of affection, including embracing, holding hands, and even kisses, were commonly documented in letters and diaries of the period.
Holding hands, even kisses.
Yes, and importantly, they did not inherently imply sexual activity. They were expressions of platonic love and deep emotional connection, not necessarily erotic ones. This can be very difficult for a modern mind, steeped in different social cues, to fully grasp without conscious effort.
It really requires a mental shift. And these friendships weren't hidden away either, as we might expect today, for intense personal bonds. They were not private affairs in the way we might think of intense personal relationships today.
No, quite the opposite sometimes.
They were typically known about, encouraged by families, and seen by society as completely compatible with heterosexual marriage. In fact, some sources even suggest they were considered a form of elective kin, almost like chosen family, which actually contributed to broader social cohesion and the foundational ideals of the new republic.
Elective kin, that's interesting phrasing. It truly was a different world of emotional connections. Building on that, another key point that comes up repeatedly in this debate, and one that is frequently misinterpreted by modern observers, is the widespread practice of bed sharing.
Ah, yes, the bed sharing.
This was a common and utterly conventional practice among men in the 19th century, driven by a variety of practical circumstances, not by sexual intent.
Exactly. These circumstances included the extremely limited availability of private rooms, especially in taverns, boarding houses, or during travel. Economic necessity played a huge role. It was simply much cheaper to share a bed.
Or just for warmth sometimes.
Or sometimes, yeah, it was even for warmth in colder climates. It was particularly common for travelers, like lawyers on legal circuits, which Lincoln himself was for many years, so you can imagine how prevalent it would have been.
And historical sources confirm Lincoln's direct experience with this practice. We know he slept in the same bed with at least 11 different boys and men throughout his youth and adulthood.
11 different men.
At least. And mainstream historians like Doris, Kearns, Goodwin, and David Herbert Donald consistently emphasize that this practice was commonplace and did not inherently suggest sexual involvement.
Right.
Goodwin specifically notes that attorneys on the 8th Circuit in Illinois, where Lincoln regularly traveled for his legal work, routinely shared beds. She even humorously points out that only the roughly 300-pound judge typically got a bed to himself.
Huh. So the judge got his own bed, but everyone else was literally spooning. It just underscores how alien some of these practices are to us now, doesn't it?
It really does.
That really makes you wonder about other subtle differences in their world, particularly around gender and emotion.
Indeed. The 18th and 19th centuries held distinct cultural beliefs about masculinity and femininity compared to our modern views. It was commonly assumed that male and female attributes, like rationality and emotionality, coexisted within all individuals.
So it wasn't seen as contradictory.
Not in the same way. This allowed for a fluidity and emotional expression that we might find quite surprising today.
Consequently, men could embrace roles and qualities identified as feminine, like being emotionally expressive or sensitive, without endangering their sense of themselves as men.
Exactly.
Cultivating sentimental friendship was actually seen as a primary means for men to develop virtues associated with sensibility, a kind of refined emotional intelligence, moral depth, and capacity for empathy, which was highly valued at the time.
It was seen as strengthening character, really.
It was a way for men to deepen their emotional and moral character.
It's also important to clarify the legal and social views on specific same-sex acts. While sadhya was illegal, akin to other non-marital sexual acts like adultery, private same-sex acts were generally overlooked, or simply not the subject of public outcry.
Okay.
What's crucial here is that the concept of a distinct homosexual identity, or gay, as a fixed defining orientation was simply not prevalent. Instead, same-sex acts were often viewed as specific vices or isolated behaviors, rather than inherent characteristics of a person's nature or who they were.
So it was about the act, not the identity.
Precisely. You weren't a homosexual, you might have engaged in homosexual acts. That distinction is critical for understanding the period.
So if we pull all this essential context together, the extensive historical documentation of male romantic friendships provides a robust alternative explanation for Lincoln's intimate male relationships.
It certainly does.
It directly challenges interpretations that apply modern sexual identity frameworks.
That's absolutely right. This historical context offers a strong, plausible explanation for Lincoln's relationships with men that simply does not necessitate a sexual interpretation. And what this does, crucially, is it shifts the burden of proof.
Right.
It puts the onus onto proponents of a gay Lincoln thesis to demonstrate that Lincoln's relationships exceeded these conventional norms in a sexual way, rather than simply exemplifying them.
The real twist here for us as modern observers is that without understanding these subtle social rules and deeply embedded cultural norms, we're not just misunderstanding Lincoln, we're asking the past the wrong questions entirely.
You really are.
It truly highlights the importance of deep contextualization and historical analysis.
Okay.
With that essential background on 19th century life, let's turn to the heart of the mystery. What exactly are the proponents of a gay Lincoln arguing? What evidence do they bring to the table that leads them to this conclusion?
Right, the specific argument.
And they point to several key relationships and pieces of evidence, interpreting them through a lens that suggests same-sex inclinations. The most frequently cited relationship is with Joshua Speed.
Indeed. Lincoln's relationship with Joshua Speed is often presented as the cornerstone of the argument for same-sex inclinations. Upon moving to Springfield in 1837, Lincoln famously declined another offer for lodging to live with Speed, sharing a bed with him for 4 years until 1842.
4 years in the same bed.
4 years. This intimacy is described by some proponents as one of the most enriching relationships in Lincoln's life and crucial to understanding him as a man with a predominantly homosexual orientation.
And they have some compelling details to back this up. For instance, Lincoln used "yours forever" as a closing in letters to Speed, a phrase he reportedly did not use in later letters to his wife.
That's specific.
And in a particularly poignant letter from February 1842, following Speed's marriage and departure, Lincoln expressed profound sorrow and a sense of loss, writing, "I feel somewhat jealous of both of you now. I shall be very lonesome without you." This is powerful emotional language that, to many proponents, resonates deeply with modern understandings of romantic attachment and loss.
You can see why they'd focus on that. Another relationship frequently highlighted by proponents is Lincoln's close association with Captain David Derickson during his presidency.
Okay, yes.
In 1862, Derickson led Company K of the 150th Pennsylvania Volunteers, assigned to guard Lincoln. Proponents emphasize the unusual closeness and arrangements here, suggesting more than mere camaraderie.
And it certainly sounds close. Lincoln himself reportedly remarked, "The captain and I are getting quite thick."
Quite thick, yeah?
A Major Chamberlain noted that in Mrs. Lincoln's absence, Derickson frequently spent the night at his cottage, sleeping in the same bed with him, and it is said making use of His Excellency's nightshirts.
Using his nightshirts.
And Virginia Fox, wife of Lincoln's naval aide, also recorded what she called gossip in her diary about a bucktail soldier here devoted to the president, when Mrs. L is not home, sleeps with him. These accounts, for proponents, suggest a homoerotic or homosexual relationship, going beyond simple platonic male bonding, even hinting at a domestic intimacy.
You can see how they'd interpret it that way, given the details. And then there's William Greene, an earlier friendship from Lincoln's time in New Salem.
Back in New Salem,
Greene shared a cot with Lincoln for a year and a half while they worked at Offutt's General Store. Their intimacy was such that, as Greene recalled, when one turned over the other had to do likewise. very close quarters.
What's particularly striking from Green's recollections for proponents of the gay Lincoln thesis is his remark about Lincoln's physical appearance, specifically that his thighs were as perfect as a human being could be.
That's quite a comment.
It is. They note that sex researchers like C.A. Tripp and Alfred Kinsey documented instances of male-on-male physical intimacy, what they termed femoral intercourse, occurring during this period. So some interpret Green's comment as highly suggestive of sexual attraction, given the potential for intimacy in such close sleeping arrangements.
Interesting connection they make there. Beyond specific relationships, proponents also point to certain textual and anecdotal evidence to support their claims. One of the most intriguing is a satirical poem written by Lincoln himself.
Yes, the Billy Has Married a Boy poem. Written by Lincoln in 1829, at the age of 20, this satirical poem includes the lines, "For Reuben and Charles have married 2 girls, but Billy has married a boy. All was in vain, he went home again, and since that, he's married to Natty."
Proponents, notably C.A. Tripp, argue that Lincoln's awareness of homosexuality and his openness in penning this bawdy poem were unique for the time period.
Tripp thought it was unique.
Yes. Tripp even asserted that a heterosexual male would not have been able to write the poem. It's worth noting that the poem was included in the first biography by Lincoln's law partner, William Herndon, but was later omitted from subsequent editions until 1942, which proponents see as an attempt to suppress potentially scandalous information.
So the omission itself becomes part of the argument.
For some, yes. Another often cited piece of evidence comes from Carl Sandburg's 1926 biography of Lincoln. Sandburg alluded to the early relationship of Lincoln and Joshua Smead as having a streak of lavender and spots soft as May violets.
A streak of lavender.
Proponents interpret streak of lavender as period slang that, while it could denote an effeminate man, also later came to connote homosexuality in certain circles. For them, Sandburg, writing in the early 20th century, was subtly hinting at something deeper that he couldn't explicitly state in the cultural climate of his time.
A kind of code. And then there's the broader perceived lack of interest in women and a characterization of his marriage to Mary Todd Lincoln as frequently strained or unhappy.
Yeah, that comes up too.
Some accounts from contemporaries suggest Lincoln never took much interest in the girls or did not seem to seek the company of girls.
Proponents like Andrew Sullivan take this further, arguing that Lincoln never developed deep emotional relations with any women, including his wife, and that his marriage was a disaster by all accounts.
A disaster. Strong words.
Very. This interpretation views his heterosexual relationships as superficial or forced, contrasting them with the profound emotional depth he allegedly shared with men, thereby supporting the idea of a primary same-sex orientation.
When it comes to the specific interpretations by proponents of the gay Lincoln thesis, C.A. Tripp's The Intimate World of Abraham Lincoln is undeniably the most comprehensive and influential argument.
Tripp, a sex researcher who was a protege of Alfred Kinsey, aimed to illuminate Lincoln's intimate world through the lens of his sexuality. He claimed to find references to specific homosexual acts in Lincoln's history.
Really specific act.
That's what he claimed. His argument for Lincoln being predominantly homosexual is the bedrock for many who support this view, and it certainly stirred up the academic waters.
Beyond Tripp, scholars like Jonathan Ned Katz and Charles Shively are recognized for their pioneering work in intuiting Lincoln's same-sex experience.
Right, they came earlier.
Their interpretations are often shaped by their own identities as gay men, who have sensed a connection to their own experiences in Lincoln's relationships, particularly with Speed. This highlights a powerful, personal dimension to historical inquiry, where one's own lived experience can open up new avenues of interpretation.
Absolutely. And Michael Ferguson offers a strong critique of mainstream historical approaches. He contends that many scholars are blind to Lincoln's same-sex inclinations due to what he describes as a personal discomfort with male homosexuality and a failure to adequately understand the sexual culture of antebellum America.
So he's saying historians are missing it because of their own biases.
Essentially, yes. Ferguson suggests that Lincoln's same-sex sexuality was unproblematic but commonplace, if not typical, in his day, implying that it's modern sensibilities that create the controversy, not the historical reality itself.
Okay, so that's the compelling case laid out by the proponents. But let's be clear. Mainstream historical consensus offers robust counterarguments, carefully recontextualizing the very same evidence within 19th century norms and highlighting Lincoln's well-documented heterosexual relationships.
a very different picture emerges.
It's a completely different reading of the historical record.
Absolutely. The general consensus among mainstream historians is that Lincoln was heterosexual. They consistently point to his well-documented romantic ties with women and his enduring marriage to Mary Todd Lincoln, with whom he had 4 children.
4 kids, yeah.
These are significant facts that can't be easily dismissed when considering his overall life.
And there's specific evidence that goes against the lack of interest in women claim that we heard earlier. Lincoln was reportedly devastated by the 1835 death of Anne Rutledge.
Anne Rutledge, right.
Available evidence overwhelmingly indicates he loved her deeply, and her death plunged him into a severe documented depression. He also had other romantic relationships with women such as Mary Owens, Matilda Edwards, and Sarah Rickard, showing a clear pattern of engagement and courtship with women throughout his young adulthood.
So, not exactly uninterested. Scholar Douglas Wilson notes that as a young man, Lincoln displayed robustly heterosexual behavior, including sharing stories of his interactions with women with his friends.
He talked about women with his friends.
Apparently so. Accounts from Lincoln's contemporaries suggest he possessed a strong but controlled passion for women. This portrayal is very different from the image of someone lacking interest in the opposite sex or solely drawn to male companionship.
And his marriage to Mary Todd Lincoln is a central point of contention in this entire debate. Jean Baker, a historian and biographer of Mary Todd Lincoln, describes their marriage as bound together by 3 strong bonds: sex, parenting, and politics.
Sex, parenting, and politics.
She argues that most observers of the Lincoln marriage have been impressed with their sexuality, and that claims of their sex life ending prematurely are speculative and largely unsubstantiated.
So, challenging that disaster narrative.
Correctly. Baker also challenges common historical criticisms of the marriage, suggesting that many contemporary historians often misunderstand the evolving nature of marriage and courtship in the mid-19th century, judging it unfairly by modern standards.
That's a fair point about applying modern standards.
Yeah.
When it comes to reinterpreting Lincoln's male friendships, mainstream historians emphasize the profound difference in 19th century social norms. Doris Kearns' Goodwin, for instance, argues that the intimacy observed in Lincoln's male friendships, including the practice of bed sharing, is more an index to an era when close male friendships, accompanied by open expressions of affection and passion, were familiar and socially acceptable.
Just normal for the time.
It was just part of the fabric of society.
She explicitly states that bed sharing was a common practice due to a lack of private quarters and was not, in itself, evidence of erotic involvement. As we mentioned, she highlighted how attorneys on the 8th Circuit in Illinois routinely shared beds, a common economic and social reality.
Right. That judge anecdote again?
Goodwin also points out that men of that era could express deep affection, saying, "I love you" or "I want to be with you," without these expressions implying a sexual relationship. It's a very different emotional vocabulary than we use today, and crucial to understanding their world.
David Herbert Donald echoes this, noting that it was not unusual for 2 men to share a bed due to myriad circumstances without anything sexual being implied. He acknowledges that Lincoln, initially unable to afford his own bed, continued sharing one with Speed for several years. But crucially, he frames this within the accepted social norms of the time, not as an anomaly or a secret.
Okay, so framing it as conventional. Charles Strozer, in his psychoanalytic study of the Lincoln-Speed friendship, offers a very nuanced interpretation.
Strozer's work is interesting.
He views their relationship as deeply intimate and profoundly crucial, but primarily as a means for Speed to help Lincoln overcome debilitating depression and navigate his path to marriage and career, rather than as a sexual relationship.
So more about psychological support.
Exactly. Stroser's interpretation focuses on their shared anxieties about marriage and a nervous debility regarding sex with women, which they corresponded about and coached each other through. This suggests a bond rooted in emotional and psychological support rather than romance.
Now let's turn to the direct critiques of the gay Lincoln hypothesis. Critics emphasize that Lincoln married and had 4 children, which for them stands in direct contradiction to claims that he was predominantly homosexual.
That's the big counterpoint for many.
They see this as a very direct and fundamental challenge to the core thesis.
C.A. Tripp's conclusions are frequently dismissed by critics as a tortured misreading of conventional 19th century sleeping arrangements, or even accused of being a hoax and fraud with a predetermined conclusion.
Pretty strong language there.
Very. David Herbert Donald's We Are Lincoln Men, published in 2003, was largely written as a direct rebuttal to Tripp's arguments, specifically dismissing the Speed and Derickson cases as love affairs. Donald even states he cannot believe that if the early relationship between Joshua Speed and Lincoln had been sexual, the President of the United States would so freely and publicly speak of it, suggesting it would have been a catastrophic scandal if it were true.
Yeah, the idea being it would have been politically impossible to hide or discuss openly if it were sexual. Furthermore, critics argue that Tripp's work is merely a dossier of ambiguities and employs what they call Kinsey-esque pseudoscience, implying a lack of rigorous historical methodology and an overreach in interpreting limited evidence.
Pseudoscience. Ouch.
These are serious academic charges that aim to undermine the credibility of the primary source for the gay Lincoln thesis.
And those specific pieces of evidence that proponents highlight, critics offer very different alternative interpretations. The Billy Has Married a Boar poem, for example, is reinterpreted by critics as simply a satirical poem written to embarrass someone against whom Lincoln held a grudge, rather than evidence of his sexuality.
Just youthful satire, basically.
It was common for young men to write bawdy or teasing verses.
Similarly, Carl Sandburg's streak of lavender illusion, which proponents highlight, is interpreted by scholars like Charles Strozier as referring to Speed's and Lincoln's softer, more vulnerable sides, not homosexual implications.
So emotional vulnerability, not orientation.
It's about emotional tenderness and sensitivity, which, as we discussed, was acceptable and even valued in male friendships of the era, not sexual orientation.
And that diary entry by Virginia Fox concerning Derickson, which contained gossip about him sleeping with Lincoln, critics note it's clearly stated to be hearsay, Tish says.
Right, secondhand information.
And her exclamation, "What stuff?" is interpreted by some as an expression of absurdity or disbelief, not as an indication of scandalous gossip. Matthew Pinsker and David Donald agree the Derickson relationship was special, but firmly not sexual, attributing the bond to Lincoln's profound loneliness during the immense pressures of the Civil War, not an illicit affair.
Loneliness during wartime makes sense as an explanation, too. Finally, a powerful argument for critics is the striking absence of contemporary accusations of sodomy or homosexuality during Lincoln's lifetime or immediately after.
The lack of scandal.
Such accusations would have been leprous and highly public in Victorian America. Given Lincoln's prominence and the ferocity of political attacks he faced, it's considered extremely unlikely that such a public figure could have engaged in widespread same-sex acts without public knowledge and condemnation. The silence, in this specific historical context, is seen as quite telling.
This brings us to the historiography of the debate itself, which is essentially the study of how this historical discussion has unfolded over time, the scholars involved, and their underlying perspectives.
The history of the history, yeah.
It's about understanding the history of the history.
Commentary on Lincoln's sexuality, or at least hints of it, can be traced back to the early 20th century, notably Carl Sandburg's 1926 biography, with its suggestive streak of lavender illusion regarding Lincoln's relationship with Joshua Speed.
Sandburg again.
However, as we discussed earlier, the debate intensified dramatically in the late 20th century, particularly after the mid-1990s. This period directly coincided with the rise of the gay rights movement, which significantly heightened both public and academic attention to the sexuality of historical figures, leading to re-examination of old sources with new questions.
And as we've highlighted, the posthumous publication of C.A. Tripp's The Intimate World of Abraham Lincoln in 2005 marked a truly significant turning point.
Absolutely pivotal.
It brought the gay Lincoln thesis into widespread public discussion and subjected it to intense scholarly scrutiny, both positive and negative. It forced historians to confront the question head-on, leading to a surge in new research and commentary.
When we look at the contributions of key scholars, C.A. Tripp is central to the gay Lincoln thesis. As a sex researcher from the Kinsey tradition, his work was pioneering in its direct approach to Lincoln's sexuality. However, as we've heard, it has been highly controversial, facing accusations of tortured misreading and being labeled as a hoax and fraud or employing pseudoscience by some critics.
Groundbreaking, but polarizing.
His approach was groundbreaking, but also polarizing.
On the other side of the debate, David Herbert Donald, a truly prominent Lincoln biographer, is a leading voice in the counterargument. His book, We Are Lincoln Men, published in 2003, largely serves as a direct rebuttal to Tripp's arguments, consistently emphasizing the conventionality of 19th century male friendships and bed sharing as normal practices for the time, providing a very different interpretive framework.
Doris Kearns Goodwin, in her widely acclaimed Team of Rivals, similarly contextualizes Lincoln's intimate male friendships within the common social norms of the era.
Goodwin's book is huge.
Right. She implicitly argues against a sexual interpretation by highlighting the widespread nature of such affectionate bonds among men during that period, framing them as typical rather than exceptional or deviant.
Charles Strozier, a psychoanalyst, offers a very different, deeply psychological interpretation of the Lincoln-Speed relationship. His work views Speed as crucial in helping Lincoln overcome profound depression and navigate his path to marriage and career.
The psychological angle.
He specifically does not support a sexual relationship, focusing instead on the intense emotional and psychological support they provided each other through shared anxieties.
Jean Baker, as a distinguished historian and Mary Todd Lincoln biographer, brings a critical perspective to the discussion, particularly challenging the anti-Mary Todd bias found in some historical accounts.
Defending Mary Todd.
She argues for a strong, multifaceted Lincoln marriage. While she acknowledged that a fully sexual dimension to Lincoln's male friendships was possible in some contexts, she also notably concluded that Tripp's bullish proclamations are easily countered by other evidence, suggesting caution against definitive claims.
So acknowledging complexity but pushing back on Tripp. Then there are Jonathan Ned Katz and Charles Shively, who are recognized as pioneering gay scholars. They are noted for intuiting Lincoln's same-sex experience early on.
Yeah, their early work was important.
Their interpretations are often shaped by their own identities as gay men, representing an early and significant attempt to explore Lincoln's sexuality from an LGBTQ plus perspective, seeing a connection to their own experiences in Lincoln's relationship with Speed. This shows how personal lens can illuminate new historical questions.
Absolutely. And Michael Ferguson takes a distinct angle, arguing that some historians' interpretations are influenced by what he perceives as a discomfort with male homosexuality and a misunderstanding of 19th century sexual culture.
Back to that idea of historian bias.
He suggests that Lincoln's same-sex inclinations, if they existed, were unproblematic but commonplace, if not typical, in his day, implying that the controversy is a modern projection rather than a historical reality.
All these different scholarly perspectives really highlight the profound influence of modern cultural shifts on historical interpretations. The gay rights movement, for example, has undeniably fueled interest in the sexuality of historical figures, leading to a re-examination of past relationships through a modern lens that asks questions previously unasked.
Definitely. And it's not just specific social movements. Broader intellectual trends like postmodernism, with its emphasis on deconstructing established narratives and questioning traditional interpretations, have also contributed to making a homosexual Lincoln plausible by challenging long-held views and opening up spaces for different interpretations of historical figures.
It encourages us to look beyond simplistic conclusions. This truly highlights how the present shapes what historians look for and how they interpret the past. Our modern cultural preoccupation with defining identity through sexuality contrasts sharply with the 19th century understanding, where homosexuality didn't necessarily essentialize a person.
That contrast is key.
This contemporary focus can lead to projecting modern identity categories onto historical figures, potentially misrepresenting their experiences in their own time. It's a constant dance between what we want to find and what the past can actually tell us.
And as we've seen, the personal identities of scholars, for example, gay men sensing a connection to their own experiences in Lincoln's relationships, can also shape their intuition and interpretation. This underscores the subjective element inherent in historical inquiry. This deep dive shows history is not simply a collection of facts, but an ongoing dialogue between the past and the present, where contemporary values and identities can illuminate previously overlooked aspects, but also risk imposing anachronistic frameworks. It's a constant, fascinating balancing act.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear the scholarly debate surrounding Abraham Lincoln's sexuality remains unsettled. There's a fundamental lack of definitive smoking gun evidence to conclusively prove or disprove a homosexual relationship.
That's right. The evidence presented on both sides is consistently described as ambiguous. And this ambiguity is a characteristic, not a flaw, of historical inquiry into deeply private aspects of individuals from the distant past.
It's just the nature of the beast sometimes.
It signifies that while new interpretations can be offered, they often remain speculative rather than definitive. This reinforces the idea that some historical questions, especially those delving into the most private corners of human lives centuries ago, may simply never yield a conclusive yes or no answer.
The value, then, shifts from seeking a definitive conclusion to understanding why the question persists, how it is debated, and what it reveals about both the historical period and contemporary society's concerns and interpretive frameworks.
Beautiful.
The debate itself thus becomes an integral part of Lincoln's historical legacy, continuing to evolve as our own society evolves.
Furthermore, the debate around Lincoln's sexuality is not purely academic. It serves broader cultural and political functions, reflecting contemporary desires for historical figures to embody or legitimize modern identities.
Right, finding heroes or representation in the past.
It's a way for communities to find their place in the historical narrative and establish historical antecedents.
And we see this explicitly stated. Michael Ferguson, for example, states that revising the myth of Lincoln in regard to his same-sex inclinations will have a positive effect on contemporary culture, especially on the education and socialization of young boys.
A clear political dimension there.
Andrew Sullivan, a prominent advocate for homosexual rights, quickly celebrated Tripp's book, indicating its perceived social utility and importance to the LGBTQ community.
Conversely, the Claremont Review of Books critiques the notion that Lincoln's homosexuality is the key to his independence and his ability to take anti-establishment positions like the issuing of the Emancipation Proclamation, labeling such a claim as preposterous.
So pushback against using history for modern agendas.
This highlights the concern that historical figures might be appropriated or distorted for contemporary political ends, rather than understood on their own terms.
This indicates that the debate is not solely about historical truth, but also about the social and political utility of history. For some, a gay Lincoln serves as an empowering historical antecedent for the LGBTQ community, linking a revered figure to a modern identity.
And for others.
For others, it is perceived as an attempt to appropriate or distort history for contemporary political ends. This highlights that historical narratives are often contested spaces, influenced by present-day social and political dynamics. It's truly fascinating to see this play out.
Regardless of his precise sexual orientation, what is undeniably clear is that Lincoln's relationships with men, particularly Joshua Speed, were profoundly deep, emotionally significant, and formative to his character and political trajectory.
The depth is undeniable.
These were crucial bonds for him, helping him navigate personal challenges and develop his unique leadership style.
His capacity for profound male friendship, whether sexual or not, speaks to a different era of emotional expression and social bonding that is often misunderstood today.
It really does.
It reminds us that human connection takes many forms across time, and the past can offer valuable lessons about the rich tapestry of human intimacy.
The ongoing debate itself underscores Lincoln's enduring relevance and the continuous process of reevaluating historical figures through new lenses, reflecting evolving societal values and scholarly methodologies. It serves as a powerful case study in the complexities of historical interpretation and the challenges of understanding intimacy across centuries.
So, what does this all mean for you, our listener? Our deep dive into Abraham Lincoln's sexuality shows us that history isn't static. It's not a dusty collection of facts.
Not at all.
Instead, it's a dynamic, ongoing conversation between the past and our present. We've unpacked the compelling arguments from both sides, grounded them in the social norms of the 19th century, and seen how our modern lenses inevitably influence what we look for and what we ultimately find.
This raises an important question for you to ponder. How does the ongoing, unresolved debate about Lincoln's private life challenge our assumptions about historical truth and the very act of knowing the past? What's it reveal about our own present-day desires for historical figures to reflect contemporary identities or validate our modern perspectives?
That's a great question to leave things on. We hope this exploration gives you a richer, more nuanced understanding of Lincoln, the complex world he lived in, and the ongoing, truly fascinating work as historical inquiry.
Yeah, hopefully it sparks some thought.
Yeah, we encourage you to delve into some of these sources yourself. There's always more to learn and more to unpack.